Change management, from our perspective, is kind of simple in many ways, and that is that it's all about relationships. Change management for us is understanding that the majority of people don't like change, and if they are not built constructive relationships through change, then what happens is that people get uncertain, people get fearful, and people get angry, and that is played out time and time again into the organisational cultures and industries that we work in. We often work with folks who implement IT programs or wanting to bring about a massive structural change in organisation. And for many folks, they kind of think, well, if we just build it, they will come. But our experience is, or the question we often ask is, will they? Our answer is yes, if we are prepared to walk with them and actually to take people with us along the way. A quote by Machiavelli where there's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. But once again, we're saying, yes, it's difficult, but if there is a sense that it's understanding that it's about relationships, and if you can take people with you, and I emphasize the with you, people want to be taken with them. If they want to be led, they're happy to be led as long as they understand the certainty of the situation. One of the interesting things for us is that many surveys show that many projects they fail, they don't work. 40% of projects meet schedule, budget and quality goals. And what our research and research from the likes of KPMG and others have found is that the biggest barriers to success is related to the people factors, with 58% attributed to changing mindsets and attitudes. Once again, bringing about change, it's understanding the people, understanding the relationships, and understanding how these organizations work. So our point is that at some time, all organizations will need change management at some point. We live in such an amazing time of incredible change that an organization even developed within the last decade at some point because of the change will need some change management. And change may include transitions to new technologies or structural changes, process changes or changes in the physical environment. What we've emphasized in this presentation is the technological change. We work extensively with IT consultants that implement IT programs, and we work with them around the user adoption, very simply in actually getting people to use the programs, because if people don't use the program, then the client has wasted their money. So I want to focus predominantly with that technological change in mind for this presentation. But we also use the term user adoption because our work has found that the word change can actually have a sense of negative connotation within organizations at the moment, because we're finding that for many people, staff and organizations that there is even a sense of change fatigue. So at Apricot, our methodology for user adoption is in 4 unique but kind of simple stages: the discovery, the planning, the build, and the transition. In the discovery, which is the definition of adoption strategy, we find this to be absolutely the most important. And the 2 things that we do first, the organizational assessment and the cultural assessment, I cannot emphasize how important that is. To identify the key players. In other words, who are the key players, who are the key staff members in this organization, both with positional influence and influential power, are very, very, very important to understand. And that takes time to understand who they are. Important to understand the history of the organization. How many change programs have gone before? Have they worked? Why did they work? Why didn't they work? Tell us about the history of the organization. Why did it come into being? What are some of the key events in the organization's history? How did it go with crisis? How did it face with crisis? What are some of the structures? How is this organization structured? Is it a flat structure? Is it a hierarchical structure? How are decisions made? And the whole idea of leadership paradigms. How is leadership played out in these organizations? I cannot emphasize enough how important it is in a change management program that work is done in that space, because you begin to understand how does this work, how does this organization go about its stuff. The second major point is then the cultural assessment, measuring an organization's culture by engaging with its employees, learning workplace terminology, understanding how we do things around here. The culture, if you do not understand the organization's culture, it will bite you on the backside. In fact, as I understand it, Ford in their boardroom in Detroit have that culture will eat strategy for breakfast any day. And our experience is that is true. It is important to understand the culture, important to understand the stories, important to understand the humor of the organizations. So when we go into organizations, we look at how do people live in the organization, what's on people's desks, what's on their walls, what is the language. We were working once with a large elite sporting firm of where we would go into the conversations where there was lots of swearing and so on and so on. We were then also working at the same time with a large not-for-profit who, when we would go in, they would open with a word of prayer before any business was done. The point I say that is because if we were to say to the elite sporting group, well, before we start, we should have a prayer, or to the not-for-profit, gee, it's, and use the swear words, we would not relate at all well there. It's so important to understand language, understand the terminologies that is being used. The communication strategy. Change programs, what we continually understand is that the people are okay about change if they understand why. Often the biggest critique of change is that we didn't know this was happening. So in this early stage, it's important to develop unique methods for communication during the pre-launch, the launch, the post-launch, and the stage of the project based on the scale and the scope of the change. And that is so important in today's changing world. So how you communicate with the Generation Y is very different from how you communicate with baby boomers. And if you try and just do one slam thing about this as your communication, then it's not going to work. It's important that lots of work and understanding is done in that space. And then what's key in this very beginning of this is to understand what is success. Ask the question of the client and a number of the key players, how do you define success? To quote Stephen Covey, that's all about to begin with the end in mind. Important to understand how do they define success, because once we've done that, we've got a clear understanding of what is the present and what is the future. So a lot of the things, as I've just gone through, the types of things, project scope and scale, organizational structure, organizational culture, the goals and objectives, what's the vision statement, not so much of the firm, but what's the vision statement of the project. Understand the goals, the objectives, and the vision of the project. Who are the key stakeholders? Who are the key influencers? We're going to talk more about that in a moment. The current methods for communication. What is the timeline? Build a Gantt chart so that you actually understand that this is what we're doing. Often a critique of given of change, this is all about the soft and fluffy stuff. No, actually put it into a timeline. Understand language, terminology. What are some of the existing change management initiatives? Did they work? Did they not? Why not? What are the key issues and constraints? And as I've indicated, what is the success? Because once we've decided that, or once we've understand, you're now going to get an understanding of the current state. So, for example, we've written an example here where we worked with an organization around the implement of a new internet strategy, the negative attitudes towards the current internet and so on. We then worked circumvention of the current internet due to outdated content and the frustration regarding need for excessive email communication. In other words, it's very important in this initial stages that you understand the present situation so that then we can also understand, well, okay, what is it that we're trying to do with this change program? What are we trying to do with the whole IT program that's being implemented, so that we're clear about the goal, we're clear about what is success, we're clear about what is it that the client is paying their money to, that they're wanting to achieve. The second stage that we look at is the area of planning. And emphasis here around build the guiding coalition, develop the communications plan, develop a recognition plan, and the education and training. The guiding coalition, once again, I cannot emphasize how important this is to do. Engage individuals outside the initial project team to help promote the change. This step involves scheduling meetings, workshops, informal communications with various groups. The guiding coalition is so important. These are the people in many ways that are actually going to help you get this program achieved, and in the IT language, for the users to adopt the IT platform that's being implemented into the client. It's important that we define the roles and the responsibilities within the team. We create timelines. And then we identify key influencers. Understanding that an influencer is not always the ones in the positions of power. They may be the person that sat in the corner for the last 20 years, but everybody looks to for a yay or a nay. It's important that we understand who they are. And as I've said before, that we establish appropriate methods of communication for the project team. So the key influencers, they're different to the key stakeholders. It's important to understand. We're talking here about positional power and influential power. They may not be the people who are actually making the decisions of whether we want this new program or not. But these are important people to understand. If we don't get them with us, then it may not be successful. And we define these in two categories. The champions. These usually undergo a change early, and their feedback is used to plan the transition process for the wider group. So these are the guys that it's very much we're asking them about the task of the change. So we're actually giving them the new IT program. We're asking them, does this work for you? How does it work? What are some of the implications regarding how this program is being implemented? The second is the change navigators. And these are the people who have that influence. These are the people who are the, if you like, the clan leaders across the organisation. We want to understand who they are, and we want to involve them in it. Why? Because if they say, yes, this is a good thing to do, then often it flows throughout the organisation. Why? Because influence flows downhill. So we're after the influencers here. And so what we want to do, we want to engage them. We want to help them to understand the why of change. We want to involve them in our team. We want to minimize the uncertainty. Why do we want to minimize the uncertainty? Because uncertainty, if it's not dealt with, will lead to fear, and that will lead to anger, and that will lead to stubbornness and difficulty and so on. So we want to work with them to celebrate the positive shifts. We want to be as transparent as possible with them, and we want to communicate using language that is not technologically based. Very important that, once again, we choose the right language in that. The major parts that I've already emphasized too in this second stage is that we develop a communication plan. And this is just so important. And the first thing is that we need to communicate the why of change. Can I say it again? Most human beings do not like change. And so unless they understand the why, I can guarantee that there'll be stubbornness and reluctance. Important that in a communication plan, it's important to understand who's going to do the communication. Who's the best? Is it the CEO? Is it the CIO? Is it someone else? Is it someone that has got respect and experience across the organisation? Who are we communicating to? Is it to individuals? Is it departments? Is it executives? Because all of those different areas will probably need different ways of communicating. An important part that we understand in communication is that we start with the familiar and then we keep it routine. So we never go to a massive change and communicate this because that'll just frighten people. And I use the word frighten deliberately. Can I say it again? Emotion change is about predominantly managing human beings in relationships and human beings' emotions. So start with the familiar and move that and keep it routine and move it towards the change that you're wanting it to go. Identify the similarities and the differences. Minimize the threat and dispel the myths. Lots of myths are created when there is a vacuum created through lack of communication. So minimize that threat, dispel myths, communicate, because it will come back that we've not communicated enough as it goes along. As I've said before, must use language that is not technological. And the timeline in conjunction with any related projects is very, very important. And as I said before, because we're now working with millennials, Gen Ys, Gen X, baby boomers, whatever other language or titles you want to give to people, important to understand that there are different ways of communicating, whatever works for the particular group that you're actually trying to communicate with. Also important that you actually understand who is it that you're trying to communicate to. So we want to raise awareness of the organization's endeavor to transition its technology platform from present to future. Promote the upgrade of current technology platform. Establish positive buy-in for transitioning to new systems. Provide an understanding of the value that the technology will have on the quality of work environment, and prepare team members for timing and impact of transition. What's important in the communication is that people understand the why. Why are we doing this change, and how is it going to affect me? If we can help them understand that, and then we can help them understand through the familiar into the uncertain, and we walk with them in that process, my experience is that change programs work. We even go to the point of being clear about what language we should use and what language we shouldn't use. So words like easier access. So everyday language to whoever you're trying to communicate with is very, very important to understand, and certainly to be able to communicate effectively. So the third area that we try and work at is the build or the solution sign-off. The implement pre-launch. Aim to develop a pre-launch campaign that includes project teasers and how-to guides to boost employee engagement. Can I say it again, that change is about relationships, and if we're able to walk with them through an uncertain time, what we're about is trying to build through an uncertainty into certainty through engaging them. That's why it's important about the relationships. The communications, once again, ensure that employees feel supported, and we emphasize that word, feel supported. I can't emphasize that enough. And understand that there are structures in place for where assistance is required. So that if you are feeling uncertain, you're not clear about what to do, then it is easy access for folks to be able to talk to people, whether it be a help desk or whatever, to be able to help them to work through it. At this stage, success management, revisit early success definitions to assess whether the project is on track and that all communications and training materials are prepared. That important work that we do at the beginning. How do we define success? What is the outcome of this project? Important at this stage that we actually understand that. And that we work, the coalition checkpoints, work to ensure that key stakeholders and key influencers are engaged in promoting the change to end users in an appropriate manner. Sometimes change programs are huge, and they're too big for people to go from A to Z. Therefore, it's important along the way in the journey that there is a signs up of, yes, we've achieved this, isn't this great, look at the success we've achieved, we're on the way, we can continue to do it. Human beings like to have certainty, they like to be able to stop for a while and understand that we're actually doing this in the process. So during the build stage, IT developers are creating a new platform. Can I emphasize again, the what this presentation's about is that we are working with some consultants who are implementing an IT platform. What we're doing is making sure that the people who are going to use it are being prepared to use it in the long term. So they're putting in the technology, we're making sure that the people are involved in it. So at this build stage, we use this time to roll out communications, preparing employees for the change. This is also the time to start planning a reward and recognition program for long-term user adoption. Emphasis around reward and recognition is very, very important. We believe very strongly in understanding rewards and recognition, but it's also important to understand, once again, who are you rewarding and who are you recognizing? Because what may work, once again, for baby boomers will not work for Gen Ys. And important to understand those stages as well. And our fourth stage is the transition, or the adoption plan handover. Education and training. Deliver training and related materials depending upon a level of engagement specified in the planning process. Once again, communications. Can't emphasize again. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Ensure that communication strategy is functioning effectively at the time of the launch. At the go-live support, provide ongoing support to ensure that the new solutions are implemented with little disruption as possible and provide issues management as required. And coalition checkpoints. Engage with key stakeholders to assess initial reactions to project launch and revisit success definitions. So we use at this stage the organisational assessment report that we did right at the very beginning during the discovery stage to create a handover plate for sustained adoption. Hopefully at this stage we've worked with the consultants, they've implemented the IT. We've worked with leadership, they're clear about this as being achieved. We've worked with the influencers, that they're making sure that messages are going out throughout the organisation, or they're clear to us and telling us people aren't getting this, people are uncertain about this, so that we're able to understand what's happening at that time, understand where is it wanting to go to, and then be able to hand that across and assess the success of any pilot initiatives by the gathering feedback in various forms, surveys, verbal accounts, written responses, listening to people over drinks on Thursday or Friday nights, listening to humour, listening to what is the sense of how is this project going on, will give us constant input into the whole of the change strategy. The training strategy, which I've not spoken about until now, needs to highlight the bridge between the old and the new. Emphasise once again the old being the present situation, the new being what is it wants to go. And then the three main approaches can be classroom training or web-based training, wikis and quick reference guides. But it's important that people are trained and that they're trained, once again, understanding what their background is. What we've found a number of times in change management strategies or implementation is that many of the executives, because this sense of who they are and so on, actually don't want to admit that they don't know. So you never want to embarrass some of the key influencers or the positional leaders. So it's important that we understand where they're at. It may even be that personalised training is given to different people so that there is a sense of clarity and certainty and comfort for them along the way. So what we're saying in our change, that is, as I said before at the very beginning, it's all about relationships. It ain't about anything else. It's about relationships. We're dealing with human beings. Human beings predominantly don't like change. They like certainty. And what we're saying is it's through relationships that you actually build that certainty. And as much relationships in a change program is of a plus moving forward. In the education, that also is a key to helping them understand the certainty. So, okay, I don't do it this way now. I now do it that way. That makes sense. We're also saying that communications are key. Communication, communication, communication. And communicating the why and the how we're actually going to do it is a key in this journey. Understanding the beginnings that I spoke about, understanding how this organization works, how does it go about its business, how does it behave, how does it make decisions, are key in bringing about change management. It's about the soft stuff, because the soft stuff in any organization is the hard stuff. I hope this has been helpful for you today. I'm more than happy to take any questions.